we have to learn to give up control and domination so that we can try to live with the world and tap into its own powers. Right? This is crucial because if you think about the Anthropocene or if you think about climate change, so much of the effects of these realities are played out as a direct result of human effort to control the world. And that's been good in a lot of ways because we're the beneficiaries of lots of these developments in medicine and in food production and so forth. But we're seeing that this is long-term. This is not a good idea. And what you're showing in these gardens is an effort by people not to try to dominate the world, but to try to live with the world and tap into the power of life, you might say, which is a remarkable thing to be able to do. Right? Just stop for a minute and think for a second about the fact that you live in a world that responds to care, that responds to nurture. Right? That land that has been abused, that once you devote your care to it, can heal. You don't do the healing. Right? The land itself has the power to heal itself if we can figure out how not to become an obstruction in that healing process. And this gets us, I think, to something that I think is profoundly theological or spiritual, if you want to put it that way. And it's not particular just to Christian or Jewish or Muslim ways of thinking. Right? Indigenous communities have talked about this for a very, very long time, where they talk about how the world doesn't simply exist. The world is created, which means the world is a material reflection of some sacred intention that says it's good for life to be. It's good for this place to be. And the power that animates this world is a sacred power. And, we can talk about it in many different traditions, but, from a Christian point of view, you have to ask the question, why does God create the world at all? And the best answer that theologians have been able to come up with is to say, well, it's because God loves for something other than God to be. It's that simple. Which means then that this world is God's love variously made, visible, fragrant, tactile, auditory, and delicious. Right? That's an amazing thing to say. And I think this is important to stress when talking about hope, because I don't want to suggest that the source of hope is somehow within us, right? That we're going to bring hope into the world because we're going to do all these really, really great things, good things. Right? History teaches us that human beings, can do some really good things, but they can do some really horrible things, even when they think they're doing good things. So we have to figure out, how do we take ourselves out of the driver's seat and learn to submit to a world that is a reflection of beauty and goodness and love, I would say, and learn how to align our activity, our economic activity, our individual ambitions to that love that's in the world. And I'm guessing many of you have heard of Robin Kimmerer, the book Braiding Sweetgrass. Have any of you heard of that book? I'm glad you do. It's a fabulous book, but she has a remarkable insight in that book. She says that when settlers came from Europe to the Americas, they did not come to the land to learn to love the land. They came to the land to own it. And as soon as that happened, they deprived themselves of the felt experience of knowing that the land loves them and takes care of them and provides for our needs, like these gardens. And she says that when you deprive yourself of the experience, the felt experience of knowing that the land cares for you, a psychic disturbance will happen in you. Because if the land doesn't matter, you who live from the land can't matter either. And so now you're stuck having to figure out, how do you assert your value in a meaningless world? It's very hard to do. And you'll develop all sorts of compensatory strategies. Many of them will end up being violent. And so what we're going to have to figure out, if we want to work into a future that is one that, warrants our commitment, our respect, our hope, we have to figure out, how do we relearn to appreciate where we are as a place where love is active, and that by us joining our love, our care, our attention, our skill, we can affect healing. Not because we're the agents of the healing, but we're participants in healing processes that are going on and are ready to be active all over the place. But it requires a shift in the way we think about what the human place on this earth is. And that means learning less how to control, dominate the world, and learning more how to love and care for the world.
Kate, I'll just give you a chance to respond or to reflect on that.
Yeah, I agree with that, absolutely. I think what fascinates me about these gardeners, and I garden myself, is that, people who work intensely in a small space with plants, there's a difference between gardeners and farmers. With scientific farming, improved farming, started in the 18th century, farmers started to sort of wage war on the environment. And you can see that, when you see a tractor, that's a repurposed tank, with a different set of chassis on it. When you have these airplanes that fly over the fields, they spread chemical warfare agents that were developed for wars. On and on and on. Farmers, that drag and dig into living soils and kill the microbial life in it over and over again. But they're looking for volume, and we're told that we need this industrial agriculture to feed 9 billion people on Earth. But about over a third of farmers on Earth are small farmers who feed themselves, and people do know how to feed themselves. And so what gardeners do is they work intensely with the plants, and gardeners don't toil very much. That's why we consider gardening as recreation. Is they're working with the plants and the microbes and letting them do the work. And so they're kind of sitting back and watching and observing. And what they observe is, when I put these plants all crowded together, they start to share and they grow better and they're more fertile. And if I don't take a shovel and do all these effort and dig into the earth, then that soil becomes richer and more prolific. And then what happens is they get a lot of produce. They have too much produce. They don't know what to do with it all. So I give half of it to Norm here and the other half to Troy. And now these guys are my best friends. And
unless it's squash.
Unless it's squash, which Norm hates. And then I give him something else.
It's just too much.
Yeah. So that's what you see is that, gardeners start to learn. And so these sort of spontaneous mutual aid societies are drawing the lessons from the organisms that they're working with. And they were like, let's help each other out with this childcare problem. Let's help each other out with this workman's compensation fund that we're building. Let's share our knowledge and our seeds and the extra produce and have a festival and have a party. And over again, I see people doing this, is learning to care from these tiny gardens and then mimicking those actions to create really beautiful little societies that and grow their own food, which they're not therefore exploiting someone else somewhere else. They're not raping soils in some other part of the world. They're not, depending on labor that's child labor or underpaid or indentured labor and slave labored in some other part of the world. Even our food today comes from indentured and enslaved labor. And it certainly comes at the cost of a great deal of environmental destruction. But these people were doing the opposite. They're like, give me your garbage. I'll turn it into soil. I'll turn it into food. Without any fossil fuels inputs, without any destruction. And that's an amazing thing. So imagine, we have, these people, they're in the cities because they were pushed off their farms where they had commons. And that's how they survived together, is because they had commons. And they had something called common law, which is the right to food, fuel, and shelter. But we know what happened in the 1776, 1789, is that those rights, the common law rights, were replaced with a new set of rights. Rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Yes. Have you ever eaten the pursuit of happiness? Have you ever been sheltered by life? These abstractions meant nothing, gave people nothing, unless you had the power and the money to win your rights. This was why that was a bourgeois revolution. It did well for people who are in the middle classes and up, but not for the working people. The working people just wanted food, fuel, and shelter, and they still do. So we have commons in our cities in the form of places that we devote to moving cars and parking them. And we're going to have these little electric people movers that Troy moves around in, and you can go 35 miles an hour on his scooter skateboard, and he can pick it up and bring it in his office with him. And so we're not going to need all that space. And so what if instead of having all those big arteries and boulevards and parking lots turned into tall glass buildings that are unsustainable and often unoccupied, that we asked to have them turned into edible landscapes? And then people would be out. And instead of having curbside parking, we could have curbside gardens. And then, you say Norm doesn't like to garden, but I do. I'll say, I'll take your plot, and then I would grow food for both of us, and I'd share it away. And then I'd be out in the streets. And then other people would be out in the streets. And the streets would be pleasant. They wouldn't be zooming by with combustion engines. They would be flowery and shady and moist and lovely. So I think we can see new worlds. We can imagine new worlds. And it doesn't even take hope. It's very much in the realm of possibility.
I think you're hitting on something super important for our conversation, which is, what do you want out of life? I mean, this is the ultimate question, right? What's the point? Right? I hear techno-optimists saying, we're so excited because we're going to terraform other planets. What a ridiculous notion. First of all, because physiologically speaking, it's impossible. Because if we can't live here where our bodies have finely tuned within millions of years of evolutionary co-development, how are we going to do that on another planet that's completely hostile to our physiology? It's also deeply despairing to think, yeah, we're going to trash this planet, so we have to go somewhere else, right? So someone like Stephen Hawking says, 100 years, and then we have to find another planet. That's just ridiculous thinking, but it's a despairing kind of thinking because it's given up on the idea that this world is enough. I mean, we have to ask the question, what's the point of all that we're doing? And there's a couple of things I want to say to help frame this. On the one hand, most of us in this room, we have lives that would be unimaginable to people living 100 years ago. The wealthiest, most powerful people 100 years ago could not have imagined what you can do with a cell phone. You can order any food from anywhere in the world. It'll be delivered to your house the next day. It's incredible. And it's still not enough. So we have to ask, what do we really want? And what Kate has been talking to us about is, don't we want good food, good shelter, good neighbors, good communities, people looking out for each other? And I have to say, there's a theological version of this, right? I mean, if you read the Hebrew prophets, for instance, what's their vision? It's people living securely in their land, being able to plant gardens and eat the produce that comes from it, being able to live to an old age with your family around you. There's no talk there about flight to some other planet or some other place. And in the New Testament, the language is not about going somewhere else, who knows where in the universe. It's about the transformation of this world, which is why it's not about creation to heaven. It's creation to new creation, and this new creation, what is it? It's this world redeemed of all the evil that is being inflicted upon it now. And I know for some of my sort of Christian colleagues, they get really disappointed when you say that you don't die and go to heaven somewhere else. Because that's the point, they thought. And instead you tell them, no, it's about this whole world being redeemed by love. And you say, that's disappointing? Why would that be disappointing? Because God creates a world that is beautiful and good and fragrant and delicious. What more do you want? Right? And I think this is where we have to ask this fundamental question, because we can put our hope in all kinds of things, but if we don't commit ourselves to loving the world that God loves and that God is present to all the time in the modes of nurture and liveliness and loveliness, we've already given into despair, I would say.